Hello, my name is Chuck Wolf. Over the years, I've worked in many different roles, including leading my own leadership consulting company since 1994. I've worked for and with some of the best companies and universities in the world, and have had the opportunity to work with government officials, military organizations, and public and private schools. I'm a leading expert and pioneer in emotional intelligence. Since 2009, I have been a volunteer hosting a radio show I created called The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. I really enjoy making a difference in people's lives. The show is on award-winning community radio station, WPKN in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In recent years, Simsbury Community Television has been sharing my shows on their station and on YouTube. My sincere hope is that everyone who watches regularly will learn how to use the Emotion Roadmap in their own lives by listening to people who call in to get help with challenges at work, home, and in communities. To learn more, go to www.emotionroadmap.com. If you have a comment or question, email me at cjwolf@cjwolf.com. Thank you and enjoy the show.
I'm Chuck Wolf, and this is the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. Thank you for tuning in and listening. Those of you that are regular listeners, if you're hearing about the show for the first time, this is my 15th year volunteering to use some of the knowledge I've gained over the years on emotional intelligence to help guide people who call in with challenges in their life that often are tied to strong emotions, either in themselves or in people that they're dealing with. And one of the things that I do on occasion is I have thought leaders, people in the circle of emotional intelligence who are either researchers or practitioners, who I believe have really accomplished and achieved significant milestones in their lives with certain things that they've done that I want them to have a chance to share with listeners in my regular listening audience and listeners all over the world. And one of those opportunities has come up with a brand new book by Cary Cherniss. Been a professor at Rutgers for a number of years, recently became emeritus, and has written a book with Dan Goleman, who many of you who know the field of emotional intelligence have probably heard about and possibly even read some of Dan's other books. Cary's also written a number of books, and again, I'll tell more about Cary in a moment. And also I have on with me Rob Emmerling, who was at one point working closely as a student with Cary and also has recently become the director with Dan, the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations, which is an organization that I'm very proud to be a member of. And as I was reading the book Optimal, the new book by Cary and Dan, I was excited to see lots of members in the consortium being referenced and know that I was there for some of the opportunities to influence the direction of the research, to hear about their research when they were first doing it, and also to have a chance to share some of my ideas, some of the innovations I was considering, and to get some feedback from the members and hopefully helping to make whatever it was I was about to do even better. And I encourage people who are listening to this to consider the opportunities, particularly if you're a company or a leader in a company, with a vision and understanding of how important it is to understand the role of emotional intelligence in all that we do. I know today still some people just think very little about emotional intelligence. They know it's out there. They've heard about it. They think it's important, but really haven't thought much more than maybe it simply means just being nicer to other people, being kinder, being more supportive. And of course, that's part of it. But emotional intelligence really involves everything we do. And it really does mean being smarter about how we emotionally relate to others and also how we manage our own emotions internally. And I think you'll find the new book by Cary and Dan to be very helpful with all of that. I think you'll find the conversation today to be very enlightening about the field and about the consortium. And I hope that for those of you, again, who are leaders who are considering that they'd like to know more about it and really want to embrace the concept and really know the importance of understanding how powerful and important it is to recognize, particularly in today's world, what people care about that might happen to work for you, how important it is to pay attention to how they're feeling, how things have changed from one generation to another in terms of how people show up for work these days, and how much more important the understanding of emotions is becoming. So for many reasons, I think you'll find the conversation coming up today very important. Cary and Dan Goleman started the Consortium for Emotional Intelligence way back in the 1990s. I began working in the 1990s with several pioneers in the field of emotional intelligence myself. Peter Salovey, now president of Yale, Jack Mayer, University of New Hampshire professor, and David Caruso, who also has affiliation with Yale and has his own consulting business, and have really embraced the field and found it not only meaningful to all my clients, but particularly meaningful to me too. I found that the more I learned about managing emotions, the more able I was to hopefully reach that optimal state that Dan and Cary write about. Cary received his PhD in psychology from Yale. In 1993, he came to Rutgers University, where he helped create the doctoral program in organizational psychology at the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology. He currently is now emeritus professor of applied psychology at Rutgers. Cary specializes in the areas of emotional intelligence, work stress and burnout, leadership and planned organizational change. He has published over 70 scholarly articles and book chapters, as well as now 9 books with this new publication. In addition to his research and writing, Cary has consulted with many organizations in both the public and private sectors, such as American Express, Johnson & Johnson, the U.S. Coast Guard, AT&T, and Colgate-Palmolive, and a number of others that I didn't list. Also, I had the pleasure of knowing and working with Cary for a lot of years now. And Cary is one of those people in the field that, and this isn't true about all the researchers, but tends to really embody emotional intelligence. A lot of people write about it. Not everybody lives it, has been my experience. And let me tell you about Rob Emmerling, who's also on the screen with us if you're watching on video. Rob Emmerling received his doctorate in organizational psychology from Rutgers University and is a leading expert in the assessment and development of competencies and emotional intelligence in the workplace, and has spent his career as a consultant, researcher, and lecturer specializing in this area. Through his work as a member of the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organization, a group he now co-chairs with Dr. Daniel Goleman, he's been involved in some of the most influential work in the field of competencies and emotional intelligence, including the development of best practice guidelines for training and developing emotional intelligence, and the identification and evaluation of model programs that significantly enhance social and emotional competencies in the workplace. Rob is an associate professor of applied psychology at Rutgers University. And since Rob's taken over, I just want to say that he moved a conference to Barcelona this past year, where my wife and I had a chance to meet with a number of different researchers who came to the meeting in Europe that don't typically come to the meeting in the United States. So that was a really a wonderful opportunity, and I want to thank Rob and Cary for all their work in this field. And I wanted to spend some time in this interview talking a bit about the consortium, then come to the book. The mission of the EI Consortium is to advance research and practice of emotional and social intelligence in organizations through the generation and exchange of knowledge. And what struck me as I thought about the consortium, and I thought about the new book that Dan and Cary had written together called Optimal, I thought, this seems to be like an historical marker. And I think there isn't anyone I've ever met that doesn't really want to know, is there some way I might manage my own emotions better? And also, boy, wouldn't it be great if I could figure out how to influence how somebody else feels? Whether I'm trying to influence a behavior in one of the people I love in my family, or it's somebody that's a coworker of mine who I disagree with and we have to make decisions together, or I have a challenging leader. I wonder if I knew more about what motivates, what they feel is most important to them. If I was able to figure that out, could I influence the way at least I relate to them? And how about those workers that don't necessarily want to do just what I tell them? Is there some way for me to understand how emotional intelligence might make me better? All those things matter. As I said, it's sort of a historical marker for me as I look at the book Optimal, because so much of what you write about has come from the work of people from our own consortium. I remember thinking when I first started and I joined you, Cary, that, boy, there's so many definitions out there. How do we all decide? I was at a conference as a speaker once, and one of the people, it was in Holland, and one of the people said, geez, if only we could get our clients to understand what emotional intelligence is, so they'd be so much better. And I thought to myself, and I said it out loud, I said, well, I think it's really important for all of us to understand what we mean when we say emotional intelligence before we ask people that we're working with to understand it, because there's so many different definitions out there. And yet someone like Ron Humphrey looked at all those definitions and he found a way to pull them all together. And Ron is one of the consortium members, and you referenced this in the book about some of the ways that he's looked at all of these studies coming together, this meta-analysis of all the different work, And while we have sort of a common frame of reference in the sense of emotions sort of hit like targeting four categories, if you will, social and individual categories, Ron somehow captured that. And we began to identify a series of benefits that result from people being more emotionally intelligent in leadership. So while it's often the case that people think maybe it's something nice to do, it's so much more than that. It actually leads to productivity. It leads to high levels of trust and engagement and performance. And part of that is, again, not just Ron, but multiple people in the consortium have been able to work on this and write about this. And I think that's one of the big significant things I think about the consortium is being part of it. And I encourage people to think about how to join if you have that interest. Well, Cary, if you could tell us about, your work with Dan in the beginning, how this all came about, that you and he decided that, hey, why don't we pull together a number of people that have an interest in this field and see if we can create something special about a way of looking at this that has some benefits worldwide.
I'd be happy to do that, Chuck, and thank you very much for those kind words. The story, I think, really begins in 1990 when Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer, whom you mentioned before, published an article in a scientific journal where they suggested that in addition to traditional intelligence, the kind of intelligence that's measured by IQ tests, there's also something that we all have, which they called emotional intelligence. And they described it as a set of abilities that involve being aware of your own emotions and the emotions of others, understanding why you feel that way, and then being able to manage your emotions based on that. So they began to do more research on that and published a few more articles. Still remain very much in the academic realm. Dan Goleman, who was and is a science writer, one of the best, working as the reporter with the brain and behavior beat on the New York Times at that point. He became aware of this concept of emotional intelligence and became very excited about it, and decided that his next book would be about emotional intelligence. That came out in 1995, and lo and behold, in just a few months, it became the most popular psychology book ever written. And it was translated into more than 30 languages. It was on the bestseller list for over a year. It looks at emotional intelligence in all kinds of domains: couples, kids in school, the role of emotional intelligence in affecting healthcare. And one of the chapters was on emotional intelligence in the workplace. Turns out that was the one that had the most excitement. Dan started getting invitations to all kinds of groups, conferences, and he decided that he would write his next book on working with emotional intelligence. And then he had the idea of creating a kind of research consortium, a consortium made up of a few of the leading people in the field and related fields. And he reached out to me. We had a common colleague who brought us together. And we met and came up with the idea of creating this consortium. He wasn't interested in directing it. He wanted to be a co-chair with me, and then I would basically be the director. So we went out and we identified 7 other people in the field. 5 of them were academics. One was a sociologist, PhD sociologist working at AT&T, and the other one was a PhD psychologist who headed up the research division at the Office of Personnel Management in the federal government. So it was kind of a blend from the beginning of practitioners and researchers, but everybody was really interested in creating a group that would, first of all, help Dan come up with the content for his next book, which came out finally in 1998, but also would be a way to prevent emotional intelligence from becoming just a big fad. As you know, Chuck, so many of these ideas appear and they become very popular in the business world and as well as the general public. There a lot of excitement. Oh, this is the magic bullet. But within a couple of years or so, they fade out. They're gone. We wanted to create a kind of mechanism to prevent that from happening with emotional intelligence. And we believe that the key to doing that would be to encourage researchers to study the topic, but at the same time, help those researchers to do research that really made sense and was useful to practitioners. And so from the beginning, we had this idea of bringing researchers and practitioners together in a group that would meet periodically. And also in the beginning, during the first 2 years, we had some foundation funding, and we did a number of studies that were done by the group. So that was really the beginning. And after 1998, we opened up the group to other people, including yourself. I think you joined not long after that. And we had the idea of having corporate members and people from nonprofit organizations, other kinds of organizations, have them join and give them some special benefits as a result of doing that. And that would replace the foundation funding. And I still remember we kind of started with the new model, and we sort of reached out to recruit organizations to provide enough funding to keep us going. Several months went by and nothing was happening, and we were getting kind of nervous. And several times Dan said, "Don't worry about it. They will come." It's sort of like the movie, build it and they will come. And sure enough, he was right. He's often right, actually. Has a lot of emotional intelligence, doesn't get too flustered about things. And by the time the funding for the consortium ran out, the foundation funding, we had a core group of organizations. I think the first ones were the Office of Personnel Management, AT&T, Johnson & Johnson came in the early days. Has kept us going ever since.
As you saw it evolve over the years, what are some of the changes that you've seen, and what are some of the predictions that you had that actually have come true? And how has it led you to writing this book today?
Well, first of all, we achieved our basic goal, which was that emotional intelligence continued to be very popular, not as popular as in the very beginning. And it sort of went in waves, but there was always this keen interest in academic research, and a lot of companies began to pick up on it. Sometimes 10 years after the consortium started, they would suddenly discover this. And today, looking back, what we've realized is that even those companies and individuals that don't use the term emotional intelligence are actually using it, following the ideas, incorporating it into their own practice. And it's become so much a part, I think, of our world and of our thinking that we don't even need to use the term anymore. So that's one important thing, I think, that's happened. And in the book, we write about some of the different models that corporations are using that basically are based on emotional intelligence, even though they don't use the terminology.
Well, one of the things that you were brilliant about, Cary, because when I first showed up at the consortium, it seemed like there were camps staked out about different types of models. That there was the
Right.
ability model, the trait model, the competency models. You seem to have a way of looking at all of this, taking the non-flustered approach, and just simply saying, "Hey, it all seems to come together in a few different ways." You were writing about it at the time, and you were also talking about it. It was the first time I really felt like, well, that's really interesting to see. While there's different types of assessments measuring different aspects of this, they all provide value in different ways for different reasons.
Yeah.
When I went to work with Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer and David Crusoe, they wanted to know, hey, we found out that we can measure abilities of emotional intelligence, and we're not sure how that helps people. I created this emotion roadmap, which was a way of saying, look, it almost doesn't matter where you start in terms of your ability to identify, use, understand, and manage emotions. But what matters is how important the questions are about what's going on inside of you, as well as who is it that you're dealing with and what matters most to them. And as you point out, Cary, I think a lot of times people talk about words like influence and motivate and inspire, and all that's emotional. All that has emotional underpinnings, and emotional intelligence influences all of that. I mean, even to the point where you think about trying to get somebody to do something different and you feel like I'm dealing with conflict. Well, there's less conflict if you stop and ask yourself, well, what do I want them to feel and how do I create that feeling for them? And the conflict seems to melt away. And that's what I've been doing with this roadmap for all these years. But I thought you resonated with me when you said, it's really about trying to understand how it all comes together and how everybody struggles at some point with their own emotions and tries desperately to influence certain other people that they care really deeply about, or they may not even like, but they have to work with. And so they're trying to figure out, how do I get this done best? And
Yeah.
what was it in your thinking that allowed you to kind of encompass all these emotions and come up with something that resonated, not just for me, but for lots of people? I think that's partly why the consortium works so well.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to take some credit for that, but I think it also, had to do with that original group of people and working as a team. But I think personally, what happened for me, first of all, we had the mission. I think everybody agreed that it would be better to kind of combine and integrate these different models to really help both researchers and practitioners to do good research and good practice. So that was the goal. And personally, that was always my interest. When I, started off, I was really more interested in application in clinical practice than in theoretical research. But I also valued research and I valued science-based practice. So that made it very natural for me to take on this role. And also, I did think that it was important, as I just said, to be able to integrate these and combine these and not eliminate the conflict between the different camps. Because I think sometimes conflict can be very productive, but monitor, modulate, manage the conflict so that it's helping us to, not just be glib about, oh, this is emotional intelligence, this is so great, but to really think hard and to go out and do some research to support our models and other models. So that's why it was relatively easy for me to take on that role.
And can you speak to what Rob's role was coming in? And it's sort of like you had a succession plan in place. That seemed like, you knew you were getting close to the point where you didn't want to be the director in the same way that you had been with administrative pieces and pulling this all together. A lot of work well done over the years. And then how did you decide, and you and Rob decide that Rob was going to be stepping into your footsteps in that respect?
Well, that's a really good question. Rob and I have not really talked about this until now, so this should be interesting. It was all part of my succession plan. From the very beginning, I had this all laid out. That was not the case at all. I have to admit that I know as an organizational psychologist, I know succession planning is really good. Unfortunately, I don't always practice what I preach. It just got to the point where after doing it for more than 20 years, I was ready to step down, back off. I thought it was certainly better for me at that point, but also better for the organization to bring in someone new. Now, the way Rob got involved, and this is based on long-term memory, so Rob may have a different memory of that, and I will, defer to him if I've got any of this wrong. I think we both will agree that he was one of my graduate students at Rutgers at that point, very early on, the first graduate student to work on the consortium. During the first couple of years, we had graduate students very involved in helping with some of the work we did. So Rob was really involved in the beginning and really making contributions in the beginning. I still remember his coming to me one day. This was, like in the late 90s, and saying, we should really have a website. And I looked at him and I said, a website? What's a website? And he explained it to me. And I said, why do we need a website? I don't see it. But Rob has good emotional intelligence when it comes to influencing people. And he, very patiently brought me around, and he became our webmaster as well as, doing a lot of other things. And Rob, remained, he became a member of the consortium, was webmaster. And so when it came time for me to turn over the reins to someone else, there was no question about who would be the best person to take over as director and co-chair. And Rob was ready. In fact, he was probably more than ready. I really appreciate how patient he was as I was dithering around trying to decide whether to make the change or not. So that's my version of the truth. Rob, you want to add to that?
I could validate quite a bit. And thank you for having me on here, Chuck, as well. I'm very happy to be included in this interview, this discussion. So yes, I certainly was a doctoral student of Cary's, and started in 1996. I became a research assistant in about 1997 to the consortium. Got my doctorate in 2003. Went on to do kind of consulting and into academia, where I've been a visiting faculty member at Esade Business School here in Barcelona. And now I'm actually associate professor of applied practice at Rutgers University, the Graduate School of Applied Professional Psychology, where I teach in our organizational psychology program. So when having observed Cary for 25 years, actually, or more, from being a doctoral student to the present day, I've really learned a lot, and I've really kind of grown up within the consortium from a very early career researcher and consultant into someone who's now kind of more mid-career. And I was able to observe how Cary was able to manage the consortium, and I was very interested in, one, making sure that the consortium continues to be a viable, vibrant entity that helps the field advance in terms of practice. And I also wanted, when I took over in 2022, the directorship of Cary, I had one overarching goal that I wanted to achieve. I really wanted to see our membership, our organizational members who are our corporate sponsors who help keep our research grounded, and our over 125 now. From the early days when Cary said we had 7, now we've ballooned to 125 individual members. We operate on every continent in the world except for Antarctica, maybe one day. And I really wanted to engage our members. This is what Chuck mentioned earlier. We had our first international conference at Esade Business School in Barcelona last year. And that was really a kind of a watershed event, I think, for the consortium, as we really try to engage not just our members in the United States, but our European members, our members really around the world. So more engagement of members. And I'm also really interested in advancing on 3, helping with the help of my colleagues in the consortium, really answering 3 critical areas, I think, that are going to push us forward into applied practice and inform applied practice in emotional intelligence more. Three big themes. One is the idea of emotional well-being, psychological safety in the workplace. COVID pandemic has really taught us this is more timely, more important probably now than ever. What is the role of emotional intelligence in stress, well-being, and psychological safety? Okay. Another, I think, very, very timely topic is what is the role of emotional intelligence in the age of artificial intelligence? How does technology impact how we interact with one another? How emotional intelligence manifests in the workplace? How's artificial intelligence going to interact with people in a way that allows us to both be productive? Okay. And the last kind of meta theme is when we first started this work, I think Cary will attest to this, in 1996, there was a lot of claims about how you develop emotional intelligence. But there wasn't really a lot of research at that point on exactly how we go about it. In the almost 27 years since then, we've learned a lot about how we develop emotional intelligence in organizations. There's even meta-analyses on training effectiveness, too, good ones, in the literature about how we develop emotional intelligence in the workplace. So we feel very comfortable that these skills can be developed in adults in the workplace. Now, to take it a bit further from a practical point of view, what are the conditions that need to exist for training and coaching to be effective? It can be effective, but as we know, like with everything, it's not going to work every single time. How can we understand the conditions that need to exist for this work, the cultural, individual, team dynamics that need to exist to facilitate the acquisition of emotional intelligence competencies, and what factors might get in the way, so we can actually leverage some of the strengths and maybe remove some of the roadblocks to helping us achieve some of our learning and training goals. And the last initiative I would say that I'm very excited about within the consortium is our mentorship program. So we're actually starting a program where we're trying to identify early career researchers in emotional intelligence and pair them with more seasoned members of the consortium in a mentoring relationship that hopefully facilitates and advances their career in a way that allows them to actually join the consortium as full members at some time in the future through their accomplishments in scholarly research. So those are the things that I've been trying to accomplish since I took over in 2022. But really just trying to get people like Chuck, and this is a good example, 3 members engaged in a conversation, doing things that we wouldn't do if we weren't a member of this group. We wouldn't have really known each other as well. We wouldn't have had these relationships, really help build relationships within the group and make opportunities for people to do research and applied projects that really keep us grounded as a field in the real concerns of our organizations. And that's what I would say about what we're trying to do.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned was engagement of members for the consortium. But as all of us know, engagement has been written about by Gallup for a number of years as one of the ways that track how organizations are managing their workforces, the people that they employ. And they have disengaged, engaged, and highly engaged, right? The concept of engagement to me, and one of the ways I sell my practice, if you will, is I talk about engagement. Everybody wants their people to be more engaged. And yet you don't often think about engagement as an emotional issue. How engaged do you feel, right? And so I present it that way. And I think to myself, you got actively disengaged. You want them at least to get to neutral, so they're not trying to hurt you. And if you got some people on the fence who are just doing what they need to do, often, and much of the literature tells us that has a lot to do with the individual relationship to the person they report to. And so if nothing else, you can make an effort to make sure that people have the tools that they need to become more emotionally intelligent about how their people are feeling. I know that we often over the years have tested people or assessed people on how they feel, but wouldn't it be terrific if every manager coming into any workplace everywhere was conscious and paying attention to how people were feeling every day. So that when you know somebody was off, you actually intervened and prevented a problem from happening. And when you knew somebody needed something, you sort of pushed the boundaries of the rules that you had to allow the organization to support that person, so that when you needed that person's support and engagement, you had it. So, I mean, there's so many reasons why I think that this goes beyond just being nicer to somebody and trying to figure out what's the right thing to say in the moment, to just really being tactical and strategic at the same time. I want to ask you one more thing, Rob, about your vision for the future, about why members benefit, who are not necessarily researchers, but just your vision of how members contribute to this and what they gain from their participation in the consortium.
We have really two levels of membership. We have individual members, which tend to be, high level practitioners such as yourself, and researchers that are conducting research within the organizations around the world. Also, we have our organizational members, which come to our conferences. As Cary mentioned, we've had AT&T, Johnson & Johnson, Wawa, and several others over the years as members. And these members benefit by, kind of being able to ask questions, being able to learn from some of the more academic members. And the academic members benefit by being able to do research within some of these companies. Again, being able to keep our research and practice grounded in what's the real concerns of executives, managers, as they exist today related to emotional intelligence. And I think it's how members benefit, both members, organizational members and individuals, is relational. We get to know each other, we get to collaborate, we get to see what each other needs, and we get to support each other in helping each other in terms of research and developing and evaluating interventions that are supposed to and do impact social emotional intelligence in the workplace. So we're always looking for new organizational members. So any member that's interested in any company that's interested in, how can I really apply this emotional intelligence in a rigorous way, using best practices, and having people and having an organization that kind of can also help you maybe evaluate what it is you're doing and the impact that you're having. We're a not-for-profit organization, so we're not a consulting firm. Okay, but we do applied research. So it's an interesting proposition to be involved in a kind of not-for-profit research institute with the thought leaders in the world. The 125 members we have, I think, really do represent the most influential thinkers and practitioners and researchers in the field of emotional intelligence. I think most people would agree with that. So it's the ability to kind of interact at that higher level and really understand, what can emotional intelligence, how can it benefit your organization, and how can I apply evidence-based practices in what I'm trying to do and accomplish in my workplace.
Well, I also know some of the sponsors, I mean, it's corporate members and who have become sponsors have also benefited from consulting with some of the consortium members. I know that there's a number of people, after I presented in Barcelona on trying to tie organization effectiveness to shared feelings and emotional intelligence, that one of the sponsors was in the room, and we've been talking since then. I know that a number of people have worked with Richard and with Steve Wolf and Vanessa and others. So I think there's all kinds of benefits that come from being part of this and being on the leading edge of this. Everybody hears about it, and all the market predictions on emotional intelligence are exponential. I mean, it's like you look at, in terms of like when artificial intelligence, your point earlier, Cary, about it's only going to cause more people to need to know, how are we going to feel? The more remote workers we have, how do we know how people are feeling if we can't see them or we're not there with them, side by side with them? How do we get that social interaction that only happens when you're together with somebody? I mean, there's so many things that are changing in our world, and I think emotional intelligence seemingly is only going to get more and more important. Well, Rob, I want to thank you for talking about the consortium. I want to focus the rest of the time on the book. So at this point, I want to say thanks for being here, Rob, and I appreciate your involvement and look forward to more meetings with you, and looking forward to seeing you in May when we have our next meeting.
Thank you, Chuck. Take care.
Bye-bye. Cary, I'd like to talk with you about optimal. And I know that even the word optimal, you differentiated early on from the word flow. And if you could talk about the concept of flow, because I think in athletics, certainly people have got this mentality of in that moment when everything just worked and it's perfect somehow. And that's what people try to aspire to is more flow. But you're talking about more, what can you do on a regular basis, on a daily basis that creates optimal performance in a sense, whether at work or at home on a regular day? And if you could, you talk a little bit about how you got to that title and the distinction between those two?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Chuck. The concept of flow has been around for many years, and it does have to do with this very special, almost transcendent experience that mountain climbers have when they're ascending one of the major peak sports. Sprinters coming out of the block. It's so different from the way it usually is. It feels like they're kind of floating and time stands still. And flow is great. It does, when it happens, it enables us to achieve great things. But for most people, most of the time, they're not going to be in flow. And if they do get into flow, it's very ephemeral. But it occurred to us that there's something related to flow, similar to flow, but much more of a kind of day-to-day experience that people have. And that seemed to be optimal. And the example that I think of is, you wake up every morning. For many of us, we're still kind of groggy and takes us a while to get going. And we have breakfast, we don't really taste it. But we get through the day and often are successful. But then there are those days where we wake up and it's different. We're immediately alert, engaged, to use the engagement again. We get up, we're thinking about the day, not like another day, but this could be a great day to do X, Y, and Z. And this kind of continues off and on during the rest of the day. We can walk into the office and kind of a spring in our step. So that's really what we were thinking of. And then, not surprisingly, when we asked, well, what helps people to get into that optimal state, to perform at an optimal level, and to sustain that, at least for most of the day, to sustain it from week to week. And of course, the answer was emotional intelligence. Now, obviously, there are a lot of other things that can contribute to our having a really optimal day or doing an optimal job in a performance. But the more we thought about it, the more we realized that emotions had a lot to do with this, and how aware people were of their emotions as they were performing a task, and their ability to then use that awareness to understand why they were feeling that way, and to use that information to help them to manage their emotions, to focus on what they were doing instead of being distracted by, half a dozen other things. That actually helped people to sustain the optimal experience. So that's basically how this flow and optimal performance and emotional intelligence all came together in our thinking.
So you decided to write a book about optimal, and you wrote about it in terms of the individual. You talked about organizations, and let's talk a little bit about team, because I know in the book that you talk about how when the consortium first came together, everybody had an opinion, and it wasn't until maybe it was Kathy, I don't know. I think you gave Kathy credit in the meetings for saying, I think maybe we need some norms here. And how that began kind of the team emotional intelligence, and then you write more about some of the other members' work and team emotional intelligence as well.
Right. Yeah. That's one of my favorite chapters. I know, like a parent, I should say, I love them all, but I have to say that the chapter on teams is really one of my favorites. And as you said, Chuck, it really, I think, began to percolate for many of us at that meeting of the consortium back in 1997, maybe. Here's what our thinking is and was, and a lot of this is based on the work of Vanessa Druskett, a professor at the business school at the University of New Hampshire, and Steve Wolf, who collaborated with her on this. When we think about the emotionally intelligent team, first of all, that in itself is kind of an interesting and novel concept for a lot of people. We think about a team in which there are a lot of emotionally intelligent individuals. And if you want a team, if you want any group to function well, to, not suppress conflict, but be aware when there's a conflict in the group and aware of how to manage it so that it helps the group to be more effective rather than less effective. What you want is a group made up of emotionally intelligent individuals. But lo and behold, personal experience and research suggests that sometimes, even with a group filled with emotionally intelligent individuals, it doesn't function that well. So then some people say, well, what's key is an emotionally intelligent leader. Again, that can really be helpful. But Vanessa's thinking and our thinking as well now is that there's another way to think about team emotional intelligence. And that is to think about a team as an entity in itself, which has the characteristics of emotional intelligence that we ascribe to people, but it's in a very different way. So for instance, think about the common situation in a team where there are two people that have different ideas about how to approach a problem. And it's beginning to be a drag on the team, right? I'm sure that many of us have had that experience. The idea of an emotionally intelligent team is that there are norms, there's a norm within the group such that when that starts to happen, anyone in the group can step in, say, hey, guys, time out. Let's step back and see what's really going on here, because I'm aware of some real emotions that are getting in the way. And so the core here is norms. What are the norms that an emotionally intelligent team needs to develop in order to really function effectively, in order to be emotionally intelligent? So there are norms. An example that a lot of teams are using that they don't even think about as emotional intelligence is, okay, in the middle of the day, and this is one of the norms that we developed in the consortium early on, after the morning session, when we're having lunch together in the room, let's take a few minutes to reflect on how the morning went. Is there anything that we might do going into the afternoon to make it more effective? That is team emotional intelligence. Everybody in the room could be average or slightly above average in emotional intelligence. But when you have that norm that's practiced on a regular basis, you have a team that's more emotionally intelligent than the one where, people never have a chance to step back and say, hey, I'm concerned about what's happening here. There's a lot of tension in the room. Can we take a few minutes to talk about that?
Well, the way I think about how I frame things these days is through this emotion roadmap I created. And so I think about, so we've got a team that is a lot of smart people in the room, some with heightened emotional intelligence, others, whatever average assessments they may have shown or demonstrated. But we have them feeling a certain way, and we want them to feel highly engaged. Yep. So norms are one of the strategies that show up as, if we all agree ahead of time before we have a difficult conversation about how we're going to manage things, or somebody's dominating a conversation or somebody's not talking at all, and how do we regulate some of that? And norms are one of the tools I think that your book talks about. I do want to mention that you do reference some of the other really interesting tools that are out there and relate them to optimal in the book. And that's things like mindsets, about a growth mindset that Carol Dweck writes about, or Susan David writes about agility. And you tie that back into how that can be also thought about and framed in terms of what I think people benefit from are not only leaders who are in place today that might want to read this book, but also people that want to become leaders. And that's really everybody who has an interest in career advancement, I think would benefit from what you've written about in terms of all the different ways that people find to work together in a more harmonious way. And as you say, conflict is great when it's managed well, terrible when it's very dysfunctional. So conflict is valued, but the skill set to manage it isn't always there. And I think your book helps with that as well. Any other highlights you'd like to share about the book that you think people should know about?
Well, I think that one thing we try to do in the book is, there are two things I think that are important about the book. First of all, I alluded to this earlier, we have an enormous amount of research now showing the effectiveness of emotional intelligence in the workplace and in other venues. Some of this research is not that well known, even to researchers in the field. So we try to highlight that. One example, I'll just give you one example that comes to mind. This was a meta-analysis. Many of your listeners may not be familiar with that. It's basically a statistical way of pooling the results of a large number of studies that were done by different researchers in different contexts. There was just one study. There are now several of these meta-analyses that show a positive relationship between emotional intelligence and performance, individual performance. One that really turned my head was a meta-analysis involving over 65,000 entrepreneurs in all kinds of business settings that looked at the relationship between their emotional intelligence and bottom line sorts of results for their companies. We're talking about financial results. We're talking about many of the metrics that businesses use. And what they found was that the more emotionally intelligent the entrepreneurs were, the better their results. Now, obviously, there were exceptions. You know, people often say, well, look at so-and-so at this company who is one of the least emotionally intelligent people in the world, and yet, you know, the company is doing great. But these are exceptions that kind of prove the rule. If you look at hundreds, thousands of companies and thousands of leaders, there's definitely a positive relationship there. So we have all kinds of research to show that. And so this book is really the culmination of all that good work that's been done. But then the other thing we try to do is to use real life examples of techniques that are used not just by individuals, but also by organizations. Another one of my favorite chapters is the one on the emotionally intelligent organization. And we actually have studied a number of different organizations that have done truly remarkable things in incorporating emotional intelligence into the fabric of the organization. It's not just a weekend training for a group of middle managers, but ongoing training in emotional intelligence and emotional skills, starting at the very top and going all the way down, and being standard for new employees, and then incorporating it into performance reviews and recruiting people in a way that signals to them basically this is what we are doing. Emotions are important, and if you're not comfortable doing things this way, we're probably not the place you want to come to.
Your book does a nice job in kind of emphasizing the importance of emotional intelligence in so many job descriptions being written today. People flagging it, and sometimes the words don't say emotional intelligence, but if you look and you see how they define certain competencies, emotional intelligence are at the heart of what they're writing about. And so
Yeah.
one of the things I think in advertising and promoting your book and encouraging people to buy it is that, hey, if I know that organizations are looking for these skill sets, how do I know I have these skill sets? How do I demonstrate I have these skill sets? How do I not only answer questions, but how do I actually show up in life that
Yeah.
demonstrates that I'm emotionally intelligent? And so I think rather than just guess about that or think that you know, I think purchasing your book really is a great way to get started on this journey for understanding what is it and how do I become better at it and what does it really mean to show up and be optimal almost all the time.
I couldn't have put it better myself, Chuck.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Cary, for being here today. I did want to just joke a little bit about. I know that you're sort of in retirement mode, leaving your in a sense or becoming emeritus at Rutgers, and another colleague of ours, Kathy Cram, who left BU a few years back and supposedly retired, immediately began studying retirement, and you immediately wrote this new book. So I don't know that any of us seem to want to go off and retire, really, but I congratulate you on this new venture, and I wish you much success in the future. Thanks, Cary.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.